Hey guys, tonight we're exploring a story that everyone in history should know. The story is Medieval Butchers, Blood, Trade, and Harsh Lives. You get comfortable, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Medieval Butchers, Blood, Trade, and Harsh Lives. The birth of the medieval butcher. Blood, survival, and the making of a necessary trade. Imagine waking before sunrise in a medieval town. The streets are still quiet, covered in a thin layer of mud mixed with yesterday's rain. Smoke rises from chimneys as families begin preparing for another difficult day. Long before merchants arrange their stalls and craftsmen open their workshops, another group is already at work. Their day starts while darkness still hangs over the rooftops. These are the butchers. For most people in the Middle Ages, the butcher was a familiar yet unsettling figure. Everyone depended on them, but few admired them. They stood at the strange crossroads between life and death, necessity and disgust. Without them, cities could not eat. Without them, armies could not march. Without them, great feasts would never happen. Yet they spent every day surrounded by blood, noise, fear, and the constant smell of death. The story of medieval butchers is not simply a history of meat. It is a story about civilization itself. As towns grew larger and populations increased, people could no longer raise all of their own animals. Villages expanded into crowded marketplaces, castles became centers of power, and monasteries fed hundreds of residents. Feeding thousands of mouths required specialists. That responsibility fell upon the butcher. Unlike modern supermarkets where meat appears neatly packaged, medieval people understood exactly where every meal came from. Children saw animals being led through the streets. Farmers negotiated prices while standing beside living cattle. Buyers could watch an ox in the morning and eat part of that same animal by evening. There was no distance between food and death. This closeness shaped medieval society in profound ways. Long before organized butcher guilds appeared, people slaughtered their own animals whenever food was needed. A farming family might raise a pig for nearly a year before killing it during late autumn. The timing mattered greatly. Cooler weather slowed spoilage, making it easier to preserve meat through salting, smoking, or drying. Every member of the household participated. The strongest adults restrained the animal. Experienced hands handled the knife. Children gathered buckets. Older relatives prepared fires for cooking and boiling. Nothing was wasted. The blood could become sausage. The fat was rendered into tallow for candles. Bones became tools. Hides became leather. Intestines became strings, cords, and sausage casings. Even the hooves and horns had practical uses. Waste was a luxury medieval people simply could not afford. As villages transformed into towns, this household activity slowly evolved into a profession. Not everyone possessed the strength or knowledge to slaughter large animals safely. Killing a full-grown ox weighing hundreds of kilograms required skill, planning, and several assistants. One mistake could injure workers or ruin valuable meat. Professional butchers emerged because expertise mattered. They understood animal anatomy. They knew where to cut. They knew how to drain blood efficiently. They understood which organs spoiled first. Most importantly, they learned how to work quickly. Speed was essential. Without refrigeration, every passing hour increased the risk of spoilage. During warm weather, meat could begin deteriorating within a single day. Successful butchers developed routines that allowed them to transform a living animal into market-ready cuts with remarkable efficiency. Their work demanded physical endurance. Imagine lifting heavy carcasses repeatedly from dawn until afternoon. Imagine sharpening knives dozens of times every day. Imagine standing on slippery ground soaked with blood and water. Imagine breathing the smell of fresh organs hour after hour. This was ordinary life. A butcher's hands rarely looked clean. Small cuts covered their fingers. Scar tissue formed across their palms. Their clothing absorbed permanent stains that no amount of washing could remove. These marks became symbols of their profession. In many towns, butchers were instantly recognizable simply by appearance. People often stepped aside as they passed. Some did so out of respect. Others did so because of the smell. The medieval world was deeply religious, and this complicated public attitudes toward butchers. Animals were considered gifts from God, but taking life remained a serious act. While slaughtering for food was accepted, unnecessary cruelty was condemned. Good butchers developed reputations not only for quality meat, but also for killing animals as quickly as possible. Whether they always succeeded is another question. Historical records describe frightened cattle refusing to enter slaughter yards. Pigs screamed loudly enough to echo through entire neighborhoods. Sheep clustered together in fear. Even experienced workers occasionally struggled to control large animals. These sounds became part of everyday urban life. Visitors entering a medieval town often encountered noise before they saw its source. The marketplace itself reflected the importance of meat. Fresh beef, pork, lamb, goat, poultry, rabbits, and occasionally wild game attracted customers from every social class. The wealthy purchased the finest cuts. Craftsmen bought affordable portions. The poor often settled for organs, bones, or scraps. Yet every purchase depended upon the butcher's skill. Quality mattered enormously. Without modern food inspections, buyers judged meat using sight, smell, and trust. A respected butcher earned loyal customers. A dishonest butcher risked public punishment. City authorities gradually realized that meat affected public health. Rotten meat could spread disease. Diseased animals threatened entire communities. False weights cheated customers. Because of these dangers, medieval governments introduced surprisingly detailed regulations. Officials inspected markets. Scales were checked. Animals showing obvious signs of illness could be confiscated. Fines discouraged fraud. Repeat offenders sometimes lost the right to practice their trade altogether. Despite these rules, enforcement varied widely. Some towns maintained strict supervision. Others struggled with corruption. Bribes occasionally influenced inspections. Powerful butchers sometimes enjoyed protection from local nobles. Like many medieval professions, success often depended as much on relationships as on skill. The location of butcher shops also reflected practical concerns. Slaughter generated enormous amounts of waste. Blood flowed into gutters. Unused organs attracted flies. Discarded bones piled beside buildings. Dogs wandered nearby searching for scraps. Rats appeared wherever food accumulated. For these reasons, authorities frequently required butchers to work near rivers or town edges where waste could be washed away more easily. Unfortunately, this solution created new problems. Rivers became polluted. Communities downstream complained. Fish populations declined near heavily used slaughter areas. People drawing drinking water, sometimes unknowingly, collected contaminated supplies. Centuries before scientists understood bacteria, medieval people recognized that foul-smelling water often accompanied sickness. They did not know why. They simply observed patterns. The butcher's profession also connected countryside and city. Farmers depended on urban markets to sell livestock. Butchers depended on farmers to supply healthy animals. Merchants transported herds across long distances. Innkeepers provided shelter along trade routes. Blacksmiths shoed the animals. Rope makers produced equipment. Cart builders maintained wagons. One profession supported countless others. A single cow represented months or even years of labor. Its value extended far beyond meat alone. This economic importance explains why livestock theft ranked among the most serious rural crimes. Stealing one healthy ox could destroy a family's livelihood. Butchers therefore had to verify ownership carefully. Buying stolen animals could result in severe punishment. Some towns required official witnesses whenever valuable livestock changed hands. Written records gradually became more common, especially in prosperous regions. Apprentices entering the butcher trade quickly learned that strength alone guaranteed nothing. They spent years observing experienced masters. First they swept floors, then they cleaned tools. Eventually they learned sharpening techniques. Only after proving discipline were they trusted with knives. Every movement carried consequences. A careless cut wasted valuable meat. A misplaced strike frightened animals. An unclean blade spoiled entire carcasses. Experience became priceless. Older butchers often recognized illness before obvious symptoms appeared. They noticed unusual behavior. Cloudy eyes, poor movement, strange breathing. Animals showing such signs might never reach the market. This practical knowledge accumulated over generations, long before veterinary science became a formal discipline. Daily routines rarely changed. Before dawn, livestock arrived. Morning brought slaughter. Late morning focused on cutting. Afternoon centered on selling. Evening involved cleaning equipment and preparing for the next day. tomorrow would repeat today's labor, and the day after that, year after year, season after season. The work never truly ended. Perhaps this endless routine explains why butcher families often remained in the trade for generations. Children grew up watching parents work. Skills passed naturally from one generation to the next. Names became associated with quality. Reputations lasted decades. Entire neighborhoods sometimes identified themselves through butcher families who had served the community for centuries. Yet despite their importance, butchers occupied a complicated social position. They handled death daily. Many people believe this hardened their character. Some admired their courage. Others feared their familiarity with violence. Legends occasionally portrayed butchers as unusually strong, intimidating, or quick-tempered. Reality was undoubtedly more complex. Most were simply workers trying to support their families in one of the hardest occupations medieval society could offer. Every feast held in a noble's great hall, every monastery meal, every soldier's ration, every family celebration involving meat, all began with someone willing to perform difficult, bloody work that few others wanted. The medieval butcher stood at the foundation of urban life. Their knives fed kingdoms, their labor sustained economies, their knowledge preserved communities. Yet each sunrise demanded the same grim responsibility. Once again, before bread reached the baker's oven, before ale filled the tavern cups, before merchants displayed colorful cloth in busy marketplaces somewhere in the cold morning air, another animal drew its final breath, and beside it stood the butcher. Silent, experienced, and already preparing the next meal for a world that depended upon hands forever marked by blood. Training, apprentices, and the powerful butchers' guilds. No one simply woke up one morning and became a butcher. The profession demanded years of training, remarkable physical endurance, and an emotional resilience that few people possessed. Every successful butcher had once been a nervous apprentice, standing quietly in the corner of a slaughterhouse, watching experienced hands move with astonishing speed while trying not to flinch at the sounds, the smells, or the sight of blood. For many boys born into butcher families, the path seemed almost inevitable. Their fathers, uncles, and grandfathers had spent their lives supplying meat to the town, and the family expected the next generation to continue the work. Yet not every apprentice came from such households. Poor families often sent sons into apprenticeships with skilled craftsmen in the hope that learning a valuable trade would guarantee a more stable future. The arrangement was rarely easy. An apprentice usually entered the household of a master butcher while still very young. Instead of living with parents, he often lived under the master's roof, ate at his table, and followed his rules. The master became more than an employer. He became teacher, supervisor, and sometimes a stern father figure. The first months contained very little glory. No apprentice was immediately handed a sharp knife. Instead, they cleaned floors soaked with blood. They scrubbed wooden chopping blocks. They carried heavy buckets of water from nearby wells. They hauled piles of bones. They swept away straw covered with animal waste. They sharpened tools that belonged to senior workers. Only after proving themselves reliable were they trusted with more important responsibilities. Patience formed the first lesson. Every experienced butcher understood that carelessness around blades could end a career or a life in seconds. The knives used during the Middle Ages were brutally effective. Long slaughtering knives pierced deep into the animal's neck and chest. Heavy cleavers separated joints and split bones. Hooks suspended carcasses above the ground. Axes occasionally helped with larger animals. These were not decorative tools. Each demanded respect. The apprentice learned to sharpen every blade by hand. A dull knife was considered more dangerous than a sharp one because it required greater force, making slips more likely. Many masters insisted that sharpening stones be used before every day's work. Eventually came the first opportunity to touch an animal destined for slaughter. Not to kill it, simply to help restrain it. This task frightened many newcomers more than expected. A frightened pig could twist violently. A sheep could kick with surprising force. A full-grown ox possessed enough strength to throw several men aside if panic took hold. Understanding animal behavior became as important as understanding anatomy. The best butchers did not rely only on force. They observed movement, they noticed fear. They learned how different animals reacted to unfamiliar surroundings. Cattle often hesitated before entering enclosed spaces. Sheep tended to follow one another. Pigs resisted loudly, filling entire streets with high-pitched screams. Calm workers generally handled these situations better than angry ones. Although medieval slaughter methods appear harsh by modern standards, experienced butchers understood that panic created danger for everyone. Once an apprentice earned enough trust, the master began explaining anatomy. Every muscle had value. Every joint required a different cut. Every mistake reduced profit. Learning where bones connected allowed meat to separate cleanly instead of tearing apart. Young apprentices spent countless hours memorizing these details. There were no printed manuals for most of them. Knowledge passed directly from master to student through observation and repetition. Sometimes the master demonstrated only once. Failure to remember meant learning through difficult experience. The education extended far beyond cutting meat. Apprentices learned how to recognize healthy livestock before purchase. Bright eyes, smooth movement, strong breathing, healthy coats, firm muscles. Each detail mattered. A sick animal could infect others or produce meat unsuitable for sale. Without laboratories or modern veterinary medicine, experience served as the butcher's greatest defense. Markets themselves became classrooms. Masters taught apprentices how to negotiate prices with farmers, how to judge weight without scales, how to estimate how much usable meat an animal would provide, how to recognize dishonest sellers attempting to hide injuries or disease. Business skills proved almost as valuable as physical strength. A butcher who bought poorly soon lost money. A butcher who sold fairly gained loyal customers. Trust became one of the profession's greatest assets. Many medieval towns contained dozens of meat sellers competing for buyers every market day. Customers remembered quality. They remembered generous portions. They remembered clean shops. Perhaps most importantly, they remembered dishonesty. A reputation could take decades to build, and only a single scandal to destroy. This growing importance led to one of medieval Europe's most influential institutions, the guild. Guilds existed for many skilled trades, but butcher guilds became especially powerful because every town depended on food. Membership was often essential. Without guild approval, opening a butcher shop could become nearly impossible. Guilds protected their members while also protecting the profession itself. They established standards. They inspected workmanship. They settled disputes. They controlled prices in some communities. They organized festivals. They supported widows whose husbands had died. They cared for injured members unable to work. In many ways, they resembled a combination of business association, training school, charity, and political organization. Joining such a guild required far more than enthusiasm. An apprentice usually spent years under instruction before becoming a journeyman. As a journeyman, he worked for wages, traveling if necessary to gain broader experience. Some journeyed from town to town, learning different cutting techniques and observing regional traditions. Only after demonstrating exceptional competence could he hope to become a master. Even then, acceptance depended upon available opportunities. Some guilds require entrance fees. Others demanded proof of financial stability. Many required a masterpiece. Unlike artists producing paintings, a butcher's masterpiece demonstrated technical perfection. The candidate might be required to slaughter an animal efficiently, divide every cut correctly, minimize waste, and present the meat according to guild standards. Senior masters observed every movement. One careless mistake could delay acceptance for years. Guild membership offered enormous advantages. Members enjoyed legal protection. They gained access to established marketplaces. They participated in important civic decisions. Some guilds even carried military responsibilities, providing armed men when towns required defense. This elevated social status surprised many outsiders. Although butchers handled bloody work, successful masters often accumulated considerable wealth. Owning livestock, buildings, tools, and market rights created significant economic power. Some butcher families eventually became respected citizens, serving on town councils or financing public construction. Money changed perceptions. A prosperous butcher commanded more respect than a poor laborer, regardless of occupation. Still, prejudice remained. Certain religious figures viewed butchers with discomfort because their profession centered upon killing. Some neighbors disliked living nearby because slaughterhouses attracted unpleasant smells. Children occasionally mocked butcher families because of blood-stained clothing. The profession occupied an unusual place within society, essential, profitable, respected, yet never entirely admired. Guild regulations attempted to improve this reputation. Members were expected to maintain discipline. Public drunkenness reflected badly on everyone. Cheating customers brought severe penalties. Selling spoiled meat threatened the guild's honor. Punishments varied. Fines remained common. Temporary suspension could occur. Serious offenders risked permanent expulsion. Losing guild membership often meant losing one's livelihood. Competition between neighboring guilds could become fierce. Each town wanted recognition for producing superior meat. Traveling merchants carried stories from one market to another. Reputation spread surprisingly fast across medieval trade routes. Some guilds developed distinctive traditions. They marched together during religious festivals. They carried elaborate banners displaying animals or crossed knives. They donated money to churches. Some commissioned beautiful altar pieces featuring their patron saints. These public displays reminded everyone that butchers considered themselves honorable craftsmen rather than simple killers. Training never truly ended. Even master butchers continued learning throughout their lives. Weather changed. Markets shifted. New regulations appeared. Livestock breeds evolved. Experience remained the greatest teacher. Older masters often recognized subtle improvements invisible to younger workers. How long to age certain meats, how temperature affected preservation, how drought influenced animal quality, how harsh winters changed customer demand. This wisdom accumulated slowly. Every season taught another lesson. Every mistake became another memory. Families preserved these lessons carefully. Some techniques remained closely guarded secrets, passed only to trusted sons or chosen apprentices. A successful butcher therefore represented generations of practical knowledge. Knowledge written not in books, but in scars, habits, and practiced movements. The apprenticeship itself also shaped character. Early mornings became routine. Hard labor strengthened muscles. Responsibility matured young minds. Mistakes carried real consequences because wasted meat meant lost income for everyone. Unlike many modern occupations, there was no separation between education and survival. Learning well meant eating well. Learning poorly threatened the future. As medieval cities expanded during the High Middle Ages, butcher guilds became increasingly influential. Kings taxed meat. Town councils regulated slaughterhouses. Markets attracted merchants from distant regions. The butcher no longer served only nearby neighbors. He became part of an expanding commercial world connecting farms, roads, rivers, castles, monasteries, and growing cities across Europe. Behind every crowded marketplace stood generations of apprentices who had patiently learned their craft one difficult lesson at a time. Every confident master had once carried buckets instead of knives. Every respected guild leader had once cleaned blood from wooden floors before sunrise. The road from frightened apprentice to powerful master demanded endurance, discipline, and years of relentless practice. It transformed ordinary boys into skilled craftsmen whose knowledge would help feed entire communities. Yet training alone could never prepare them for the greatest challenge awaiting every butcher, the moment the first blade met living flesh. For that lesson, experience remained the only teacher. Slaughterhouse's blood and a butcher's daily life. Before the church bells announced the beginning of a new day, the butcher was already awake. The streets remained dark, illuminated only by scattered lanterns and the pale glow of the moon. Most families still slept beneath wool blankets, but the butcher's work could never wait until sunrise. Fresh meat had a very short life in the medieval world, and every hour before the heat of the day was precious. The slaughter yard slowly came to life. Farmers arrived with cattle, sheep, pigs, and goats that had been raised for months or even years. Some had traveled only a few miles, while others had been driven across counties through rain, mud, forests, and dangerous roads. Every animal represented a significant investment, and both the farmer and the butcher hoped to make a fair profit. The first task of the morning was not killing. It was observation. An experienced butcher carefully examined every animal before agreeing to buy it. He looked at its eyes, checked its breathing, watched the way it walked, and searched for injuries or signs of illness. A sick animal could ruin a day's business and damage the butcher's reputation. Knowledge mattered as much as strength. Years of experience allowed skilled butchers to notice small details that younger apprentices often missed. An unusual cough, a swollen leg, or cloudy eyes could warn that something was wrong. Only after the inspection ended did preparations begin. Knives were sharpened until their edges reflected the morning light. Heavy cleavers rested beside thick wooden chopping blocks scarred by years of constant use. Ropes, hooks, buckets, and wooden barrels were arranged in familiar places where every worker could reach them without hesitation. Nothing was left to chance. A single mistake around frightened livestock could lead to serious injury. The slaughter yard itself was a place unlike any other in the medieval town. The ground was covered with straw to absorb blood and moisture. Wooden fences divided different animals into separate pens. Wells or nearby streams supplied the water needed for cleaning tools and washing hands. The smell was overwhelming to newcomers. Fresh hay mixed with manure. Smoke drifted from nearby fires. Wet leather hung drying in one corner. Blood soaked into the earth beneath countless footsteps. For those who worked there every day, the smell became part of life. Visitors rarely forgot it. As dawn approached, the first animal was led forward. Silence often replaced conversation. Every worker understood his role. One controlled the ropes. Another stood ready with tools. Others prepared to lift and clean the carcass immediately afterward. The work demanded speed, precision, and complete concentration. Once the animal had been slaughtered, there was no time to pause. The body had to be processed before spoilage began. Blood was collected whenever possible because it remained valuable. In many regions, it became an important ingredient in sausages or other traditional foods. Fat would later be melted into tallow for candles or cooking. The hide was carefully removed so it could be sold to tanners, who transformed it into leather for shoes, belts, saddles, and armor. Almost nothing was wasted. Bones became tools. Horns became cups or combs. Sinew became thread or cord. Even materials that seemed useless often found another purpose. This remarkable efficiency was not driven by environmental awareness, but by necessity. Every part of the animal possessed economic value. The butcher's greatest skill appeared during the cutting process. A carcass was not simply chopped apart. Each section required knowledge of muscles, joints, and bones. One clean cut preserved valuable meat. A careless blow could damage several expensive portions at once. Customers expected quality. Innkeepers preferred large joints for roasting. Noble households demanded the finest cuts. Ordinary families searched for smaller and more affordable pieces. Poor laborers often bought organs, bones, or scraps that wealthier buyers ignored. Every customer found something within his budget. By early morning, the market had become crowded. Women carrying baskets stopped to inspect fresh meat. Cooks from monasteries negotiated prices for large orders. Servants from noble houses selected premium cuts for evening feasts. Merchants compared prices before making purchases. The butcher rarely enjoyed a quiet moment. Questions came constantly. How old was the animal? Was it slaughtered today? Which cut was best for boiling? Which would roast most tenderly? Experienced butchers answered without hesitation. Their knowledge inspired confidence. Reputation determined success. In an age without refrigeration or government food inspectors, trust became one of the butcher's most valuable possessions. A single dishonest sale could drive customers elsewhere. Word traveled quickly through medieval towns. People remembered who sold fresh meat. They also remembered who cheated them. Throughout the day, apprentices remained busy. They carried heavy cuts from the slaughter yard to the market stalls. They washed buckets. They sharpened blades worn dull by constant use. They swept away bones and scraps before flies became too numerous. Hard work formed the foundation of their education. No apprentice became a master without first learning discipline. The physical demands were relentless. Large carcasses required enormous strength to lift. Repeated chopping strained shoulders and wrists. Workers spent hours standing on uneven ground made slippery by blood and water. Cuts and bruises were common. A butcher's hands rarely remained free from scars. The dangers extended beyond accidents. Minor wounds could become infected. Without modern medicine, even a small cut sometimes developed into a life-threatening illness. Many butchers carried permanent injuries, earned through decades of labor. As the afternoon approached, another challenge appeared. Heat. Warm weather accelerated spoilage. Unsold meat had to be preserved quickly. Some pieces were rubbed heavily with salt. Others were smoked over slow-burning fires. Certain cuts were sold at reduced prices before evening. Anything was better than allowing valuable food to rot. Finally, as the marketplace emptied and the streets grew quieter, the butcher's work still was not finished. Tools required cleaning. Knives needed sharpening for the following morning. Wooden tables were scrubbed. Waste was removed from the slaughter yard. Accounts were checked. Orders for the next market day were planned. Only then could the butcher return home. His clothes smelled of smoke, leather, and blood. His hands were rough from constant labor. His body ached from lifting, cutting, and standing since before dawn. Tomorrow would be exactly the same. Long before the town awoke, he would once again sharpen his knives, inspect another group of animals, and begin the difficult work that kept medieval cities alive. Few people truly understood the burden carried by these craftsmen. Most saw only the meat displayed neatly upon the market stall. Very few witnessed the long hours, physical exhaustion, and dangerous labor hidden behind every single meal. To the people of the Middle Ages, the butcher was more than a tradesman. He was an essential part of everyday survival. Without his work, markets would stand empty, armies would march hungry, monasteries would struggle to feed their brothers, and great feasts inside castles would never take place. His profession demanded strength, knowledge, discipline, and endurance in equal measure. Every sunrise began with a responsibility. Every sunset ended with exhaustion. And between those two moments lay an ordinary day in one of the hardest professions medieval Europe had ever known. Blood, waste, disease, and the dark reality of medieval sanitation. When people imagine a medieval butcher, they often picture a man standing beside a wooden block with a blood-stained apron and a heavy knife in his hand. That image is not entirely wrong, but it tells only a small part of the story. The greatest challenge was not killing the animal. It was dealing with everything that came afterward. Every animal produced an astonishing amount of waste. Blood spilled across the ground. Internal organs had to be sorted. Bones accumulated in great piles. Fat, hides, stomach contents, and countless smaller remains demanded immediate attention. Nothing simply disappeared on its own. In the modern world, refrigeration, plumbing, and sanitation systems quietly solve these problems every day. The medieval butcher had none of them. Instead, he relied on experience, hard labor, and whatever resources his town could provide. The slaughter yard began filling with waste almost as soon as work started. Straw soaked up blood until it became too heavy to use. Workers shoveled it into carts that carried it away from the market. Wooden buckets overflowed with water used to wash knives, tables, and hands. Every few hours, fresh water had to replace the old. Cleanliness was never easy. Many medieval towns lacked paved streets. During rainy seasons, mud mixed with blood and animal waste until the ground became slippery and foul-smelling. Boots carried this mixture through nearby roads, where horses, dogs, and pedestrians unknowingly spread it farther across the town. People noticed the smell long before they understood the danger. The scent of rotting meat, spoiled blood, and decaying waste became part of everyday life near slaughterhouses. Those who lived nearby often complained to town officials, not because they understood bacteria, but because experience taught them that foul places often seemed to accompany sickness. They did not know about microorganisms. They knew only what they could see, smell, and remember. For generations, communities had observed that areas with stagnant water, rotting waste, and overcrowding often experienced outbreaks of disease. Their explanations were usually wrong, but their observations were sometimes surprisingly accurate. This forced many town councils to make difficult decisions. Where should slaughterhouses be built? Keeping them in the center of town made meat easy to sell. Moving them outside the walls made transportation more difficult. Most communities searched for a compromise. Many slaughterhouses were placed beside rivers. The flowing water offered an easy solution. Blood could be washed away. Buckets could be refilled. Floors could be cleaned. Waste could be carried downstream. To medieval people, this seemed practical. Unfortunately, rivers served many purposes. The same water supplied homes. It powered mills. It watered livestock. Children played along its banks. Women washed clothing there. Fishermen depended upon healthy streams. As slaughterhouse waste entered the current, it affected everyone living downstream. Without realizing it, many communities contaminated their own water supplies. The consequences could be severe. Fish disappeared from heavily polluted sections. The water changed color after busy market days. During warm weather, the smell became almost unbearable. Some travelers described approaching certain medieval towns by following the odor rather than the road. Local governments slowly responded. Rules appeared. Some ordered butchers to remove waste before sunset. Others required drains to be cleaned regularly. Certain cities appointed inspectors responsible for checking slaughterhouses. Failure to obey could result in fines or temporary closure, but enforcement depended upon the town. A wealthy butcher with political connections sometimes escaped punishment. A poorer craftsman might face harsher treatment for the same offense. Life in the Middle Ages rarely followed perfect justice. Animals themselves also created sanitation problems before slaughter. Large herds waiting in holding pens produced enormous quantities of manure. Rain transformed these areas into muddy pools filled with waste. Flies gathered in astonishing numbers. Dogs wandered freely, hoping to steal scraps. Rats appeared wherever food remained available. These animals became permanent residents around many markets. Cats hunted some of them. Dogs frightened others away. Neither could eliminate the problem entirely. Rats thrived wherever people stored grain, meat, or waste. Although medieval people did not understand that rats and fleas played a major role in spreading some diseases, they certainly disliked their presence. A butcher's workshop, therefore, required constant cleaning. Tables were scraped repeatedly throughout the day. Knives were rinsed whenever possible. Hooks holding carcasses had to remain strong and reasonably clean. Wooden chopping blocks presented a particular challenge. Unlike stone or metal, wood absorbed blood and moisture deep into its surface. Years of chopping carved grooves into the block, creating places where dirt and fluids collected. Replacing such equipment was expensive. Most butchers simply cleaned it as thoroughly as they could and continued working. The arrival of summer made every problem worse. Heat accelerated decay. Meat spoiled faster. Flies multiplied rapidly. The smell intensified. Workers hurried constantly because they knew that every hour reduced the value of fresh meat. Winter offered relief. Cold temperatures naturally preserved food for longer periods. Many families deliberately slaughtered pigs during late autumn for exactly this reason. Salting and smoking became easier when cooler air slowed decomposition. Seasons controlled nearly every aspect of medieval food production. The butcher adapted accordingly. Illness remained an ever-present fear. Cuts received while working could easily become infected. A knife slipping against bone might slice deeply into a worker's hand. Without antibiotics, the wound relied entirely upon the body's ability to heal. Some workers recovered quickly. Others developed swelling, fever, or infections that could become fatal. Experienced butchers often carried numerous scars. Each one marked another narrow escape. The profession demanded courage, but also acceptance. Danger formed a part of everyday life. Customers rarely thought about these hidden risks. They focused instead on the quality of the meat displayed before them. Behind every market stall stood hours of difficult, unpleasant labor, invisible to the buyer. Even after the day's sales ended, sanitation work continued. Unsold scraps had to be removed. Blood washed from the floor. Waste loaded onto carts. Buckets emptied. Tools dried before being stored overnight. Only after everything had been cleaned as well as possible could tomorrow's work begin with fresh preparations. Communities sometimes blamed butchers whenever epidemics appeared. Whether fair or unfair, people naturally suspected professions associated with blood, dead animals, and unpleasant smells. Fear encouraged rumors. Rumors encouraged accusations. Some believed butchers spread disease through carelessness. Others insisted they merely worked in places where illness was already unavoidable. The truth remained far more complicated. Many diseases had little connection with slaughterhouses at all. Poor drinking water, overcrowded housing, malnutrition, inadequate sanitation throughout entire towns all contributed to the spread of illness. The butcher worked within that environment rather than creating it alone. Nevertheless, the sight of blood made an easy target for suspicion. Religion also influenced attitudes toward cleanliness. Many monasteries emphasized washing before meals. Certain religious festivals required careful preparation of food. Some church authorities reminded butchers that cleanliness reflected respect for God's creation. Practical concerns therefore mixed with spiritual expectations. A careful butcher protected both his customers and his reputation. The careless one invited criticism from every direction. Despite these hardships, the trade continued to grow. Cities expanded. Populations increased. Demand for meat never disappeared. Generation after generation accepted the unpleasant realities because society depended upon their labor. Behind every feast celebrating a royal victory, behind every market serving hundreds of families, behind every tavern offering a hearty evening meal, there remained countless hours spent cleaning blood from wooden floors, hauling waste through muddy streets, fighting insects during the summer heat, and struggling against the constant threat of disease. The butcher's greatest battle was not always fought with a knife. Often it was fought against decay itself. Each morning fresh meat competed against time. Each afternoon, sanitation competed against spoilage, and each evening, exhausted workers prepared to face exactly the same struggle when the next dawn arrived. For the medieval butcher, survival depended not only on skill with a blade, but on the endless effort to keep order in a world where blood, waste, and disease were never far away. Selling meat in medieval markets, prices, customers, and the fight for survival. Long before the first customer arrived, the butcher's most difficult work had already been completed. The animals had been inspected, the slaughter was finished, the carcasses had been cleaned, divided, and prepared. Now came the part of the profession that determined whether all that effort would bring profit or loss. The medieval marketplace was far more than a place to buy food. It was the beating heart of every town. From sunrise until late afternoon, merchants shouted their prices. Farmers displayed baskets of vegetables. Fishermen offered their morning catch. Bakers stacked fresh loaves of bread. And craftsmen advertised everything from shoes to iron tools. Among all these voices, the butcher had to compete for attention. His stall was usually impossible to miss. Large cuts of beef hung from sturdy wooden beams. Pork rested upon thick chopping blocks. Lamb and mutton were arranged carefully so customers could examine the quality of the meat. Every display served a purpose. A neat stall suggested discipline. A clean cutting block inspired confidence. Sharp knives reflected professionalism. Even before a customer spoke a single word, the appearance of the stall shaped their opinion. Unlike today's fixed prices, bargaining formed an ordinary part of medieval trade. Very few customers accepted the first price they heard. Instead, every purchase became a conversation. A merchant buying enough meat to feed an entire caravan expected a discount. An innkeeper who purchased from the same butcher every week often negotiated special prices. Even ordinary townspeople sometimes attempted to reduce the cost by reminding the butcher that they had been loyal customers for years. The butcher needed more than skill with a knife. He needed patience. Some negotiations lasted only a minute. Others continued until both buyer and seller grew tired. Success depended on understanding people as much as understanding livestock. Every customer entered the market with different priorities. The wealthy sought tenderness. A noble household preparing for a feast demanded the finest cuts available. Appearance mattered almost as much as flavor. Large roasting joints, carefully trimmed and beautifully presented, reflected the prestige of the family serving them. Castle kitchens often sent trusted servants rather than allowing inexperienced workers to make expensive purchases. Those servants knew quality. They examined color. They checked freshness. They questioned the butcher closely before agreeing on a price. One poor purchase could embarrass an entire household. The growing middle class approached the market differently. Craftsmen, merchants, and prosperous shopkeepers wanted good meat, but they also watched their expenses carefully. They searched for value. A slightly less fashionable cut might taste just as good after several hours in a stew. Practical decisions often outweighed luxury. Then came the poor. For many laborers, meat remained an occasional luxury rather than a daily meal. When they visited the butcher, they searched for the least expensive options. Bones with small amounts of meat still attached, organs that wealthier buyers ignored, fat suitable for cooking, scraps left after larger cuts had been sold. The butcher understood these customers well. Selling inexpensive pieces still generated income. Leaving them unsold generated nothing. Nothing useful could be allowed to go to waste. Every sale mattered. The clock never stopped. Fresh meat could not wait forever. As the morning progressed, the pressure increased. Warm weather shortened the time available. Flies appeared. The sun climbed higher. The butcher constantly watched both his customers and the changing temperature, sometimes lowering the price by a few coins before midday proved wiser than risking complete spoilage by evening. Experience taught these difficult lessons. No written rule could replace years spent behind the market stall. Trust became the butcher's greatest advertisement. There were no printed posters, no newspapers, no colorful signs promising quality. Instead, reputation spread from neighbor to neighbor. One satisfied customer recommended a reliable butcher to friends. One dishonest transaction could damage years of careful work. People remembered being cheated. If a butcher secretly mixed fresh meat with older cuts, word eventually reached the marketplace. If he used false weights, customers noticed. If spoiled meat caused illness, rumors spread rapidly. The punishment could be severe. Town officials sometimes imposed fines. Guilds disciplined their own members. In serious cases, a butcher might lose the right to trade entirely. The profession depended upon public confidence. Without it, no business survived for long. Market inspectors occasionally appeared without warning. They examined scales to ensure honest measurements. They checked the freshness of meat. They investigated complaints. Some inspections remained fair. Others became opportunities for corruption. A wealthy butcher with influential friends might escape punishment more easily than a newcomer without connections. Such inequalities existed throughout medieval society. They also existed in the marketplace. Seasonal changes influenced business more than many modern people realize. Winter usually brought greater supplies of preserved meat. Autumn became an especially busy season because many families slaughtered animals before the cold months. Spring often presented challenges. Stored food supplies had grown smaller. Fresh livestock remained limited. Prices could rise sharply. Summer demanded constant vigilance. Heat increased spoilage. Transport became more difficult. Every day brought new uncertainty. Religious traditions shaped the butcher's business in unexpected ways. During periods of fasting, many Christians avoided eating certain kinds of meat. Demand changed almost overnight. Fish sellers often enjoyed greater profits during these weeks. Butchers prepared for these cycles well in advance. A successful craftsman understood not only animals, but also the religious calendar. Festivals created the opposite effect. Christmas, Easter, harvest celebrations, royal weddings. victorious armies returning home, each occasion increased demand dramatically. Large households ordered enormous quantities of meat. Markets became crowded from dawn until sunset. The butcher worked longer hours but also earned greater rewards. Some of the year's highest profits arrived during these celebrations. Competition remained fierce. Rarely did one butcher control an entire town. Several families often operated neighboring stalls. Each hoped to attract loyal customers. Some emphasized quality. Others focused on lower prices. A few became famous for particular products such as sausages, smoked meats, or carefully aged beef. Small differences helped businesses survive. Innovation existed even in the Middle Ages. Transportation added another layer of difficulty. Fresh meat could not travel great distances without spoiling. Most butchers therefore served local communities. Livestock traveled more easily than butchered meat. Farmers often drove living animals to market because they remained fresh until the moment of slaughter. This system shaped medieval trade routes across Europe. Roads filled with herds moving toward growing towns. Drovers spent weeks guiding cattle through forests and across rivers. Their arrival transformed ordinary market days into major commercial events. Money flowed through many hands before reaching the butcher. Farmers expected fair payment. Drovers demanded wages. Town authorities collected taxes. Guilds required fees. Rent had to be paid. Tools eventually needed replacing. A profitable market day did not guarantee great wealth. Expenses consumed much of every sale. Only careful management kept the business alive. The butcher's family often played an essential role. His wife might manage accounts. Children carried smaller purchases to waiting customers. Older sons learned the trade while assisting at the stall. Daughters sometimes helped organize sales or prepare preserved products. The butcher shop functioned as both workplace and family enterprise. Success depended upon everyone's contribution. As evening approached, difficult decisions remained. What should happen to unsold meat? The finest cuts rarely remained available. Less popular pieces required attention. Some entered barrels filled with salt. Others were smoked. Certain portions sold cheaply to taverns preparing stews. Nothing edible disappeared without careful thought. Waste meant lost profit. Efficiency ensured survival. When darkness finally settled over the town, the marketplace slowly emptied. Merchants packed away their goods. Farmers prepared for tomorrow's journey. Customers returned home carrying baskets filled with the day's purchases. The butcher remained behind a little longer. He cleaned his knives, counted his earnings, reviewed tomorrow's orders, inspected the remaining meat, planned another day that would begin before sunrise. Few professions balanced so many responsibilities at once. He was a craftsman, a businessman, a negotiator, an employer, a food supplier, and above all, a man whose livelihood depended upon earning the trust of an entire community. Every coin placed into his hand represented more than a simple sale. It represented confidence. Confidence that the meat was fresh. Confidence that the weight was honest. Confidence that tomorrow and the day after, the butcher would once again be waiting in the marketplace, ready to feed a town that depended upon his skill. Yet beyond the busy market stalls, another powerful force shaped every decision he made: religion. For in medieval Europe, faith determined not only how people prayed, but also what they could eat. Religion, fasting, and the medieval laws of meat. For a medieval butcher, the sharpest force shaping his business was not always the knife in his hand. Often it was the church. In the modern world, people usually decide what to eat according to personal preference, price, or health. During the Middle Ages, millions of Europeans also considered another question before preparing a meal. Was eating this food permitted today? Religion influenced nearly every aspect of daily life. The ringing of church bells marked the hours. Religious festivals determined the calendar. Marriage, birth, and death all passed through the church. Food was no exception. For the butcher, this meant that demand for meat could change almost overnight. One week, the marketplace overflowed with customers, eager to buy beef, pork, or mutton. The next week, the same people walked past the butcher's stall without stopping. Not because they had lost their appetite, because their faith required restraint. Fasting was one of the most important religious practices in medieval Christianity. It was more than simply eating less. It was considered an act of discipline, humility, and spiritual reflection. By giving up rich foods, believers hoped to strengthen the soul while weakening worldly desires. The exact rules varied over time and from region to region, but across much of medieval Europe there were many days each year when eating meat from four-legged animals was forbidden or strongly discouraged. The most famous fasting season was Lent. For 40 days before Easter, communities prepared for one of Christianity's holiest celebrations. Markets changed dramatically. Fish merchants became unusually busy. Salted cod, herring, eels, and other fish appeared in large quantities. The butcher watched many regular customers head toward the fish stalls instead. Business slowed. Yet, experienced butchers were never surprised. This happened every year. Preparation was part of survival. Some reduced the number of animals they purchased before major fasting periods. Others concentrated on preserving meat for future sales. Those who ignored the religious calendar often lost money. Faith shaped commerce. Not every restriction applied equally. Children, the elderly, the sick, pregnant women, travelers. In some circumstances, these groups received exemptions or special permission. Even monasteries sometimes adjusted their diets when illness threatened the health of their communities. Reality often proved more complicated than strict religious rules suggested. Still, public expectation remained powerful. A Christian openly ignoring fasting regulations risked criticism from neighbors. The church rarely needed to monitor every meal. Communities watched one another. Reputation mattered. The butcher therefore occupied an unusual position. He sold food that many people desired but could not always eat. Timing became everything. The weeks before major fasts often produced excellent business. Families purchased meat while they still could. Feasts marked the final days before restrictions began. Large joints of beef disappeared quickly. Pork became especially popular. Taverns filled with customers enjoying hearty meals before weeks of simpler diets. Then the market changed almost overnight. The butcher adapted because adaptation meant survival. Religion also influenced which animals people considered acceptable. Different cultures and regions developed their own traditions. Local customs sometimes blended with official religious teachings. Certain foods became associated with celebration. Others symbolized sacrifice. The medieval butcher needed to understand these customs, as well as he understood anatomy. A misunderstanding could cost valuable customers. Monasteries presented another fascinating relationship with the butcher's trade. Many monasteries raised their own livestock. Others purchased animals from nearby farmers. Some employed their own workers to prepare meat. Larger religious communities often required enormous quantities of food. Although monks and nuns observed strict fasting rules, feast days could still require impressive meals for visitors, pilgrims, or important religious occasions. The butcher therefore maintained regular business with institutions devoted to spiritual life. The relationship was practical. The monastery required food. The butcher supplied it. Church authorities also cared about honesty in the marketplace. Selling spoiled meat was more than poor business. It could become a moral failing. Cheating customers through false weights or poor quality products violated both civic regulations and religious teachings about fairness. Priests sometimes preached against dishonest merchants. A butcher who built his fortune through deception risked damaging both his reputation and his conscience. Guilds reinforced these expectations. Many butcher guilds placed themselves under the protection of a patron saint. Members attended religious services together. They contributed to church festivals. They donated money for charitable works. Some even carried candles in religious processions through the streets. Faith formed part of their professional identity. Their occupation involved taking animal life. Religion reminded them that such work carried responsibility. Public slaughter also raised difficult moral questions. Animals were viewed as part of God's creation. Most theologians accepted killing animals for food because human survival depended upon it. Unnecessary cruelty, however, remained unacceptable. A skilled butcher therefore earned respect by working efficiently rather than carelessly. Quick slaughter reduced suffering. Poor technique created unnecessary pain. Although medieval standards differed greatly from modern animal welfare practices, experienced craftsmen generally understood that calm, efficient work benefited everyone. The animal suffered less. Workers remained safer. The meat retained better quality. Practical concerns and moral expectations often pointed toward the same solution. Not everyone followed religious rules perfectly. Some wealthy individuals quietly ignored fasting restrictions. Others obtained special permissions under certain circumstances. Remote villages sometimes interpreted regulations differently from large cities. Human nature remained remarkably consistent across the centuries. People searched for exceptions whenever rules became inconvenient. The butcher witnessed these differences firsthand. He learned which customers observed every fast with complete dedication. He noticed which households quietly continued buying meat. Discretion often became part of good business. Royal courts introduced another level of complexity. Kings, queens, and great nobles frequently entertained important guests during periods that included religious observances. Castle kitchens employed talented cooks, capable of preparing elaborate fish dishes when required. Yet they also expected butchers to provide exceptional meat whenever feast days allowed. Political celebrations, diplomatic meetings, and military victories all influenced demand. The butcher's fortunes often rose and fell alongside the religious and political calendar. Markets themselves reflected these changing rhythms. On fasting days, the butcher's stall appeared quieter. Fish sellers called out loudly to passing crowds. Vegetable merchants enjoyed increased attention. Bread remained essential every day. The marketplace adapted naturally. No merchant operated in isolation. Each depended upon the habits of the community. The butcher also learned patience. A slow week during Lent did not necessarily signal failure. He knew Easter approached. He knew celebrations would return. He knew families would once again seek roast meats, rich stews, and festive meals. Experience taught him to think beyond today's sales. It taught him to anticipate tomorrow. Religion, therefore, never simply restricted the butcher's trade. It shaped its rhythm. Periods of abundance followed periods of restraint. Feasts balanced fasts. Celebration followed sacrifice. The calendar itself became as important as the knife. For generations, medieval butchers organized their lives around this sacred cycle. Their work fed both ordinary families and magnificent feasts. Their business slowed during holy seasons and flourished when celebrations returned. Faith and food remained inseparable. The butcher understood this truth better than almost anyone. He knew that the same customer who refused a single piece of pork during Lent might return weeks later to purchase enough beef to feed an entire wedding feast. Such was the rhythm of medieval life. A rhythm measured not only by the seasons, but by the prayers, fasts, and festivals that shaped an entire civilization. Yet even the most faithful butcher could not escape another danger that waited silently within his profession. Disease, not the illnesses carried by customers, but the hidden threats that came with handling animals every single day. Dangerous diseases, injuries, and the occupational hazards of medieval butchers. Few people envied the life of a medieval butcher. From the outside, the profession promised steady work and reliable income. Every growing town needed fresh meat, and skilled butchers rarely lacked customers. But behind the crowded market stalls and the busy slaughter yards lay a profession that tested the human body every single day. Every sunrise brought new risks. The butcher stepped into a workplace where nearly everything could cause injury. Heavy animals, razor-sharp knives, slippery floors, boiling water, open fires, and exhausting physical labor combined to create one of the most dangerous occupations in medieval Europe. Experience reduced those dangers. It never eliminated them. A master butcher often began his day by examining his tools. The knives were inspected carefully, not only because sharp blades cut meat more efficiently, but because a damaged or loose handle could prove deadly. A knife slipping from its handle at the wrong moment could injure the worker or anyone standing nearby. The cleaver demanded equal respect. Designed to cut through joints and heavy bone, it relied on weight rather than speed. Swinging such a tool for hours required both strength and precision. A single mistake could split more than the chopping block. Apprentices learned this lesson quickly. No master trusted an inexperienced boy with valuable tools on the first day. Before touching a slaughter knife, the apprentice spent weeks carrying water, cleaning the workshop, sharpening blades, and observing experienced craftsmen. Only after demonstrating patience and discipline did he begin assisting with more dangerous tasks. The animals themselves presented the greatest challenge. An ox might appear calm while standing in a holding pen only to panic the moment it sensed danger. Such an animal possessed enormous strength. One violent movement could knock several men to the ground. A frightened horse could kick with tremendous force. A pig could bite. A ram could charge. Even sheep, normally considered gentle animals, sometimes reacted unpredictably when frightened. The butcher therefore needed more than courage. He needed to understand behavior. Experienced workers recognized the warning signs: a twitching tail, restless pacing, rapid breathing, wide, frightened eyes. These small details often revealed whether an animal might suddenly become dangerous. Not every injury happened during slaughter. Many occurred afterward. The slaughterhouse floor became increasingly slippery as the morning progressed. Blood mixed with water. Small pieces of fat fell beneath workers' boots. Straw absorbed some of the moisture, but never enough to keep the surface completely safe. Falls became common. A fall while carrying an ordinary bucket caused bruises. A fall while holding a sharp knife could become far more serious. Many older butchers carried scars that had nothing to do with animals and everything to do with losing their balance. The work also demanded incredible physical endurance. Carcasses weighing hundreds of kilograms had to be lifted, suspended, and moved repeatedly throughout the day. Even with assistance from fellow workers, the effort strained backs, shoulders, and knees. Unlike many craftsmen who could occasionally sit while working, the butcher remained on his feet from before dawn until evening. Rest came only after the market closed. As years passed, the body remembered every hour of labor. Hands became rough. Fingers stiffened. Shoulders lost flexibility. Many veteran butchers developed bent backs from decades of lifting heavy meat. There was little choice. Without working, there was no income. Without income, there was no food for the family. Infections created another invisible enemy. The butcher handled raw meat every day. Tiny cuts appeared so frequently that many workers barely noticed them. A small wound caused by a knife or a splinter from the chopping block seemed insignificant. Sometimes it remained insignificant. Sometimes it became deadly. Without modern antibiotics, even a minor injury could become infected. Redness spread around the wound. Swelling followed. Fever often came next. Some workers recovered naturally. Others did not. Medieval medicine struggled to explain these illnesses. Doctors spoke of imbalances within the body. Priests encouraged prayer. Healers prepared herbal mixtures made from plants gathered in forests and gardens. Certain remedies probably eased pain. Others likely had little effect. Yet families continued using them because they represented the best knowledge available. The butcher also faced dangers from the animals themselves. Livestock occasionally carried diseases that humans could catch through close contact. Medieval people did not understand microscopic organisms, but experienced workers noticed that handling obviously sick animals sometimes led to illness among those performing the slaughter. As a result, many respected butchers developed their own practical rules. Animals behaving strangely were treated with caution. Those showing obvious signs of severe illness were often rejected altogether if local authorities allowed it. Such decisions protected both business and community. Fire remained another constant threat. Large fires heated water used for cleaning and processing. Fat was melted into tallow. Meat was smoked over slow-burning wood. In workshops built largely from timber, one careless spark could destroy an entire building. Town officials understood this danger. Many communities established rules regarding where fires could be lit and how waste should be stored nearby. Summer created problems that winter rarely did. Warm temperatures accelerated decay. Flies appeared in enormous numbers. Fresh meat demanded rapid sale before spoilage began. Workers hurried constantly, knowing that every passing hour reduced both quality and profit. Winter, by contrast, slowed decay but introduced different hardships. Frozen ground became difficult to work upon. Workers stood for hours in bitter cold. Hands became numb, making accidents more likely. Every season tested the butcher differently. The emotional burden rarely appeared in official documents, but it almost certainly existed. A butcher witnessed death more often than nearly anyone else in the community. What seemed shocking to visitors gradually became ordinary to those who worked there. Routine helped. Professionalism helped. Yet no amount of experience completely removed the weight of such responsibility. Many butchers believed that unnecessary cruelty reflected poorly upon both the craftsman and the trade. A quick, efficient slaughter protected the quality of the meat while reducing chaos in the yard. Calm workers generally completed their tasks more safely than angry or impatient ones. This practical wisdom passed from master to apprentice across generations. The guilds reinforced these lessons. Older members reminded younger craftsmen that skill meant more than physical strength. A respected butcher combined patience, judgment, discipline, and experience. He knew when to move quickly. He knew when to stop. He understood that one careless decision could destroy years of hard-earned reputation. Despite the hardships, thousands continued entering the profession. Why? Because the work offered something precious in medieval society. Security. People would always need food. Cities continued growing. Markets expanded. Armies marched. Monasteries fed hundreds of residents. Demand for skilled butchers remained remarkably steady compared with many other trades. The profession was dangerous. It was exhausting. It was often unpleasant. Yet it also provided purpose. Every successful market day meant families would eat. Every carefully prepared carcass supplied inns, castles, hospitals, and homes. The butcher stood at the center of an essential network that kept medieval life functioning. His scars told stories. His tired muscles reflected years of service. His rough hands revealed a lifetime spent performing work that most people depended upon but few wished to do themselves. The dangers never disappeared. The risks never ended. Each dawn brought another opportunity for injury, illness, or misfortune. Yet before the church bells rang, the butcher always returned to his workshop, sharpened his knives, and began again. For courage in the Middle Ages was not always found on the battlefield. Sometimes it was found inside a slaughterhouse where ordinary men accepted extraordinary risks simply to keep an entire community fed. Wealth, poverty, and the rise of powerful butcher families. To many people, the medieval butcher looked like an ordinary craftsman. His clothes were stained. His hands were rough. His days were filled with hard labor. It was easy to assume that every butcher lived the same difficult life. The truth was far more complicated. Across medieval Europe, the butcher's profession created both poverty and prosperity. Some butchers struggled every day to earn enough money to feed their families. Others became among the wealthiest citizens in their towns. The difference often depended on far more than skill with a knife. Location mattered. Opportunity mattered. Connections mattered. And perhaps, most importantly, reputation mattered. A butcher working in a small rural village lived a very different life from one serving a busy commercial city. In the countryside, customers were few. Many farming families raised and slaughtered their own animals. The village butcher often earned only modest profits, supplementing his income by trading hides, fat, or preserved meat. Business followed the rhythm of the seasons. Some weeks were busy, others were painfully quiet. City butchers lived in another world. Growing towns brought thousands of mouths to feed. Merchants, craftsmen, monks, soldiers, travelers, and noble households all depended on professional food suppliers. Demand remained steady throughout much of the year. A successful urban butcher could build an impressive business. The market became his stage. Every satisfied customer increased his reputation. Every loyal household strengthened his future. The wealthiest butchers rarely worked alone. They employed apprentices, journeymen, laborers, family members. Some owned several market stalls. Others rented additional buildings for storing salted or smoked meat. As their businesses expanded, they handled not only slaughtering, but also transportation, preservation, and wholesale trade. Money flowed through many hands before reaching the final customer. The butcher stood at the center of that network. Guild membership played a crucial role in determining prosperity. Without the protection of the guild, competing successfully became extremely difficult. Guilds controlled who could open shops. They regulated quality. They settled disputes. They sometimes limited the number of butchers allowed to operate within a town. This reduced competition while protecting established members. For ambitious apprentices, becoming a master meant more than earning respect. It meant gaining access to economic opportunity. Once accepted into the guild, a butcher could establish his own workshop, train apprentices, and build a family business that might survive for generations. Some families achieved remarkable success. Fathers taught sons. Sons trained grandsons. Knowledge accumulated across decades. Customers trusted familiar names. A respected family often inherited not only tools and buildings, but also goodwill, earned through years of honest work. That reputation became one of the most valuable possessions any business could own. Prosperous butcher invested their earnings wisely. Some purchased farmland where livestock could be raised directly. Others lent money to merchants. A few acquired houses near important market squares, collecting rent from tenants while continuing their trade. Over time, certain butcher families accumulated wealth comparable to successful merchants. Their social position gradually improved. Town councils often included wealthy craftsmen among their members. Successful butchers sometimes participated in civic government, helping decide taxes, market regulations, and public works. This surprised many outsiders. People associated butchers with blood and hard labor. Yet financial success opened doors that physical work alone could not. Money commanded respect. Still, prosperity never came without risk. Livestock prices fluctuated. Disease could wipe out entire herds. War disrupted trade routes. Poor harvests reduced customers' ability to purchase meat. A single disastrous season sometimes erased years of careful savings. Economic success required constant attention. The butcher had to judge markets accurately. Buying too many animals before demand declined could lead to heavy losses. Buying too few meant missing profitable opportunities. Business decisions carried enormous consequences. Competition remained relentless. Every butcher wanted loyal customers. Some emphasized exceptional quality. Others advertised fair prices. A few became famous for smoked meats, sausages, or carefully prepared specialty products. Innovation existed even within traditional trades. The marketplace rewarded those who adapted. Family life reflected economic success. Poor butcher households often lived beside their workshops. Work and home blended together. Children grew up surrounded by tools, hides, and the constant rhythm of the trade. Everyone contributed. Wives managed accounts. Older children assisted in sales. Younger ones performed smaller tasks until they became old enough for greater responsibility. Wealthier families enjoyed more comfortable surroundings, larger homes, better clothing, improved diets, education for their children. Yet even prosperity did not remove them entirely from the realities of the profession. The smell of the slaughterhouse still clung to their clothing. The demands of the market still required early mornings. Success reduced hardship. It did not eliminate work. Public opinion remained divided. Many people respected prosperous butchers because they supplied an essential service. Others viewed sudden wealth with suspicion. Some believed that anyone growing rich through the meat trade must have charged unfair prices. Jealousy occasionally followed success. Guild records revealed disputes over market rights, pricing, and competition. Economic rivalry sometimes became personal. Court cases emerged. Arguments spread through neighborhoods. Business and politics often became closely connected. Royal governments also recognized the value of prosperous butcher communities. Taxes collected from livestock and meat sales contributed to public revenue. Healthy markets strengthened local economies. Kings and town officials therefore had practical reasons to encourage reliable meat supplies. Regulations increased. Inspections became more common. Successful businesses generally accepted these rules because they protected honest merchants from unfair competition. Not every butcher dreamed of becoming wealthy. Many sought something simpler. Stability. Enough income to feed their children. Enough respect to maintain good relationships with neighbors. Enough security to survive difficult winters. For countless families, these modest goals represented genuine success. The profession rewarded persistence more often than brilliance. Years of careful work gradually built trust. Trust attracted customers. Customers created income. Income supported future generations. This slow accumulation of reputation formed the true foundation of lasting prosperity. Behind every respected butcher family stood decades of discipline. Countless mornings before sunrise. Thousands of sharpened knives. Millions of careful cuts. Success rarely arrived suddenly. It grew piece by piece, just as every carcass was divided with patience and precision. The butcher therefore occupied an unusual place within medieval society. He could be poor. He could be wealthy. He could remain an anonymous craftsman, or he could become one of the town's most influential citizens. Everything depended upon skill, opportunity, reputation, and the unpredictable fortunes of medieval life. Yet even the richest butcher remained subject to the law. And when greed overcame honesty, the consequences could be severe. For medieval authorities watched the meat trade carefully, and crimes involving food were often punished with remarkable determination. crime, punishment, and the illegal meat trade in medieval Europe. The medieval marketplace depended on one essential idea: trust. Every customer who approached a butcher stall believed that the meat before them was fresh, honestly weighed, and safe to eat. Unlike the modern world, there were no printed labels, expiration dates, or refrigerated display cases. A buyer judged quality with little more than their eyes, nose, experience, and confidence in the butcher's reputation. That trust was valuable. And wherever something valuable exists, someone eventually attempts to abuse it. Not every butcher followed the rules. Most worked hard to earn an honest living, but a small number discovered that deception could bring quick profit. Selling poor quality meat, using dishonest scales, purchasing stolen livestock, or ignoring market regulations, all offer opportunities to earn more money, at least for a while. The temptation was real. A healthy ox represented a considerable investment. If business had been slow for several weeks, or if taxes had increased unexpectedly, some butchers found themselves under enormous financial pressure. A dishonest shortcut sometimes appeared easier than honest patience. One of the most common forms of fraud involved spoiled meat. Fresh meat had only a limited lifespan. Without refrigeration, warm weather quickly encouraged decay. A butcher who failed to sell everything before evening faced an expensive problem. Throwing away unsold meat meant losing money. Some dishonest traders therefore attempted to disguise spoilage. They trimmed away visibly damaged sections. They covered unpleasant smells with herbs or strong spices. They mixed older meat with fresher cuts. Customers who lacked experience sometimes failed to notice. Those who became ill afterward rarely forgot. Rumors spread rapidly through medieval towns. Word traveled from neighbor to neighbor faster than any official announcement. A single accusation could destroy years of careful work. The marketplace remembered everything. Another frequent crime involved false weights. Every butcher owned scales. Customers expected them to measure honestly. Yet dishonest merchants occasionally altered their equipment. A heavier weight hidden beneath the scale. A damaged balance beam. A cleverly adjusted counterweight. The difference might appear small on one purchase, but after hundreds of transactions, the profits became substantial. Town officials understood this danger. Inspectors regularly examined scales to ensure accuracy. Merchants caught cheating faced heavy fines. Repeated offenses could lead to public humiliation or permanent loss of trading rights. Stealing livestock posed an even greater problem. Across medieval Europe, cattle, sheep, pigs, and goats represented wealth. For many farming families, a single ox provided both labor and financial security. Losing such an animal could push an entire household toward poverty. Livestock thieves therefore committed one of the most serious rural crimes. These criminals often operated at night. Animals disappeared from fields. Brand marks were altered. Horns were cut or reshaped. Stolen livestock was driven quickly toward distant markets before owners realized what had happened. The butcher stood at an important point within this illegal trade. An honest butcher refused suspicious animals. He asked questions. Who owned them? Where had they come from? Were witnesses available? A dishonest buyer asked fewer questions. Authorities expected professional butchers to recognize unusual circumstances. Claiming ignorance rarely satisfied the courts. Market regulations attempted to reduce these risks. Some towns required official records for expensive livestock sales. Others insisted that transactions take place only on designated market days under public observation. Open trade made theft more difficult. Secrecy benefited criminals. Visibility protected honest commerce. Poaching created another legal challenge. Kings and great nobles often claimed exclusive hunting rights over forests filled with deer, wild boar, and other game. A poor hunter killing one deer to feed his family might face severe punishment if the animal belonged to a royal forest. Butchers purchasing illegally hunted meat risked becoming accomplices. Game sold at suspiciously low prices invited uncomfortable questions. Some ignored those questions. Others refused the risk entirely. Smuggling also developed wherever towns collected taxes on meat or livestock. Avoiding official market gates allowed traders to escape paying fees. Hidden paths through forests, river crossings used after dark, remote country roads. These routes became valuable to smugglers hoping to increase profits. Town governments fought back by increasing patrols and imposing stricter penalties. Corruption complicated enforcement. Not every inspector remained honest. A wealthy merchant occasionally offered money in exchange for silence. Certain officials accepted, others refused. The struggle between regulation and corruption existed throughout medieval society. The meat trade was no exception. Guilds played a major role in maintaining order. A butcher's guild protected its members, but it also protected the profession itself. Selling rotten meat damaged everyone's reputation. Cheating customers weakened public confidence. Guild leaders therefore investigated complaints seriously. Punishments varied: warnings, fines, temporary suspension. In extreme cases, permanent expulsion. Without guild membership, earning a living as a butcher became almost impossible in many towns. Public punishment served another purpose. Justice was meant to be seen. A merchant caught using false weights might stand publicly before neighbors while officials announced the offense. Confiscated meat could be destroyed. Heavy fines reminded everyone that dishonesty carried consequences. Medieval governments believed visible punishment discouraged future crime. The courts treated food offenses seriously because the consequences reached beyond individual customers. Spoiled meat threatened public health. False weights undermined confidence in markets. Stolen livestock damaged rural economies. Every dishonest act weakened the community. Kings, nobles, guilds, and town councils therefore shared an interest in protecting the integrity of the meat trade. Of course, complete success proved impossible. Crime never disappeared. Economic hardship continued tempting desperate individuals. Poor harvests increased pressure. Wars disrupted supplies. Plague reduced populations while creating labor shortages. Every crisis tested the honesty of merchants. Some passed the test. Others failed. Customers gradually developed their own methods of protection. Many returned to the same trusted butcher week after week. They examined meat carefully before buying. They compared prices across different stalls. Experience became their strongest defense. Children learned these habits from parents. Families passed them from one generation to the next. Trust, once broken, proved difficult to rebuild. For the honest butcher, reputation became more valuable than gold. A respected name attracted customers without shouting. A dishonest one drove them away, even when prices remained low. Years of integrity often produced greater rewards than months of deception. The butcher understood this truth better than anyone. His livelihood depended not merely upon sharp knives or strong hands, but upon the confidence of the people standing before his stall. Yet while laws governed markets and guilds, protected honest trade, another force shaped the butcher's life just as deeply: his family. Behind every successful workshop stood wives, children, apprentices, and relatives whose labor often remained invisible to the outside world. The butcher might have stood at the chopping block, but he rarely stood there alone. Part 10. Women, Families, and Everyday Life. Inside medieval butcher households, when people imagine a medieval butcher, they usually picture a single man standing behind a chopping block with a heavy knife in his hand. The reality was very different. A successful butcher's shop was rarely the work of one person. It was a family enterprise. Behind every market stall stood wives balancing household accounts, children learning the trade from an early age, apprentices carrying heavy loads, relatives preserving meat, and elderly family members passing on knowledge gathered over decades. The butcher may have been the public face of the business, but he was never its only worker. For most butcher families, there was little separation between home and workplace. Many lived in buildings attached directly to their shops. The sounds of business became part of everyday family life. Before sunrise, footsteps echoed through the workshop. Animals arrived outside. Knives struck sharpening stones. Wood cracked beneath heavy cleavers. By the time children opened their eyes, the day's work had already begun. The smell of meat, leather, smoke, and wood fires drifted through every room. To outsiders, such odors seemed unpleasant. To the butcher's family, they were simply the smell of home. The butcher's wife often carried responsibilities equal to her husband's, even if medieval records mentioned her less frequently. While her husband worked in the slaughter yard or market, she frequently managed the business behind the scenes. She kept financial records, collected payments, purchased salt and other supplies, organized household expenses, negotiated with regular customers, prepared preserved meats, supervised servants or apprentices. In many households, she became the quiet force that kept the business functioning smoothly. If illness or injury prevented the butcher from working, his wife often assumed even greater responsibility. Historical records from several European towns show widows continuing to operate butcher shops after the death of their husbands. Some managed successful businesses for many years. Guild regulations varied from town to town, but experienced widows were often permitted to continue trading, especially if they had sons still completing their apprenticeships. Practical necessity frequently outweighed tradition. Children entered the world of butchering almost from birth. No formal classroom taught them the trade. Their education happened at home. A young child might begin with simple chores, sweeping the workshop, fetching water, collecting firewood, cleaning buckets, watching carefully as older family members worked. Every year brought greater responsibility. By adolescence, many boys understood much of the profession even before becoming official apprentices. Girls also contributed significantly. Although they rarely performed slaughtering itself, many assisted with preserving meat, preparing market stalls, serving customers, keeping accounts, and managing domestic responsibilities. essential to the family's success. Their work often remained invisible in official documents. It was nevertheless indispensable. Meals inside a butcher's household reflected both privilege and hard work. One might imagine that butcher families ate the finest meat every day. Sometimes they did. More often, they consumed the cuts that proved difficult to sell. Less fashionable portions, organs, stewing meat, bones for broth. Nothing useful went to waste. Practicality guided the family table just as it guided the business. Life followed an exhausting rhythm. The butcher rose before dawn. His wife often rose with him. Children awakened shortly afterward. By sunrise, nearly everyone had already completed several hours of labor. Evenings brought little rest. Accounts required checking. Tools needed cleaning. Food had to be prepared. Clothing required mending. Tomorrow's work demanded careful planning. The profession left little room for idleness. Family reputation mattered enormously. Customers did not judge only the butcher. They judged his household. Polite children reflected good upbringing. An orderly shop suggested discipline. Reliable family members inspired confidence. The success of the business depended upon the behavior of everyone connected to it. Marriage often strengthened commercial relationships. A butcher's son sometimes married the daughter of another craftsman or merchant. Such unions connected families, expanded business networks, and increased economic security. Property, tools, and professional knowledge passed between generations through both inheritance and marriage. These family alliances helped preserve successful businesses for decades. Apprentices occupied an unusual position within the household. Legally, they were students. Practically, they became temporary family members. They ate at the master's table, slept under his roof, worked beside his children. The master expected obedience. In return, he provided food, shelter, and instruction. The relationship could become close. Some apprentices remained lifelong friends of the families who trained them. Others remembered strict discipline and demanding expectations. Both experiences probably existed. Festivals offered rare moments of celebration. During important religious holidays or successful market seasons, butcher families occasionally enjoyed brief periods of relaxation. Neighbors gathered. Meals became larger. Stories were shared around warm fires. Music filled streets that normally echoed with the sounds of work. These occasions reminded hardworking families that life offered joy as well as responsibility. Yet hardship remained never far away. A serious injury to the butcher threatened the entire household. Without his labor, income declined immediately. Poor harvests reduced customers' spending. Disease affected both people and livestock. Fire could destroy workshop and home together. Every family lived with uncertainty. Saving money whenever possible became essential. Many butcher families placed enormous importance upon education through observation. Children watched adults constantly. How to judge livestock, how to sharpen knives, how to speak respectfully to customers, how to negotiate fairly, how to recognize dishonesty. Lessons appeared not in books but in everyday actions. Character developed alongside professional skill. Older family members became living libraries of experience. Grandparents remembered harsh winters, animal epidemics, years of famine, times of prosperity. Their stories prepared younger generations for challenges that written records rarely captured. Advice passed from one generation to the next. Never waste good meat. Always keep your knives sharp. Treat loyal customers fairly. Protect your reputation. These simple principles often determined whether a family business survived or disappeared. Women also played an important role during times of crisis. If war drew men away from towns, wives frequently managed businesses temporarily. When plague struck communities, surviving relatives carried on the work as best they could. The resilience of these families helped entire towns continue functioning despite extraordinary hardship. The butcher's household therefore represented far more than a workplace. It was a school, a business, a home, a place where practical knowledge, discipline, and responsibility blended into everyday life. Every family member contributed according to age and ability. Together they transformed one of medieval society's hardest professions into a lasting way of life. Generations came and went. Children became apprentices. Apprentices became masters. Masters became respected elders. The cycle continued. Yet no matter how skilled a family became, certain days demanded efforts beyond anything encountered during ordinary business, royal feasts, religious festivals, great celebrations. On those occasions, the butcher's ordinary routine disappeared completely. For feeding an entire kingdom required work on a scale few people today can imagine. The legacy of medieval butchers, blood, trade, and the foundations of the modern world. As the Middle Ages slowly gave way to the Renaissance and the early modern world, Europe began to change. Cities grew larger. Trade routes stretched farther. Governments became stronger. Science slowly challenged ancient beliefs. New technologies appeared. Yet through every one of these changes, one profession remained essential: the butcher. For centuries, medieval butchers had risen before dawn while the rest of the town slept. They worked through winter snow, summer heat, famine, plague, war, and political upheaval. They witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, not from castle walls or battlefields, but from the crowded marketplaces where ordinary life continued no matter who wore the crown. History often celebrates kings, generals, and explorers. Far less attention is given to the craftsmen whose labor allowed civilization itself to function. The butcher belonged to that forgotten group. Without reliable food supplies, no medieval city could survive for long. A growing population required organization. Animals had to be raised, transported, inspected, slaughtered, cut, preserved, sold. Every stage demanded knowledge accumulated across generations. The butcher stood at the center of that chain. His work connected farmers with towns, merchants with customers, nobles with servants, monasteries with pilgrims, armies with soldiers. Few professions touched so many lives every single day. By the late Middle Ages, many butcher guilds had become respected civic institutions. They established professional standards, protected apprentices, maintained quality, supported members during illness or hardship. Although their rules sometimes limited competition, they also encouraged consistency in an age when formal government regulation remained limited. The idea that skilled professions should maintain standards did not disappear with the medieval world. It evolved. Many modern professional associations trace their origins to similar guild traditions. The butcher's tools also changed. Simple iron blades gradually improved as metalworking advanced. Cutting techniques became more refined. Workshops grew cleaner. cities slowly introduced better sanitation regulations. Knowledge that had once existed only in the memory of experienced craftsmen gradually appeared in written manuals. Experience became education. Tradition became science. Perhaps the greatest transformation involved the understanding of disease. For centuries, medieval butchers fought infection without knowing its true cause. They observed patterns. They valued cleanliness whenever practical. Yet they could not see the invisible organisms responsible for many illnesses. Centuries later, scientific discoveries revealed bacteria, parasites, and other microscopic threats. Suddenly, practices that once relied on experience gained scientific explanation. Clean water, proper waste disposal, food inspection, safe handling procedures, veterinary medicine, all developed far beyond anything a medieval butcher could have imagined. Modern slaughterhouses bear little resemblance to their medieval predecessors. Refrigeration preserves meat safely for long periods. Protective equipment reduces workplace injuries. Veterinarians inspect livestock before processing. Health officials monitor food safety. Machines perform many of the heaviest tasks once completed entirely by human strength. Consumers often purchase meat without ever seeing the animal from which it came. The distance between food and its origin has never been greater. For medieval people, that distance barely existed at all. Children understood where meat came from. Families watched livestock pass through town. Markets displayed the entire process openly. Life and death remained visible realities. Whether that closeness encouraged greater appreciation or simply reflected necessity is a question historians continue to discuss. The profession itself also changed socially. Many of the prejudices once directed toward butchers gradually faded. Today, butchery is recognized as a skilled trade requiring training, precision, knowledge of food safety, and respect for craftsmanship. Although the work remains physically demanding, it no longer carries the same social suspicion that surrounded many medieval slaughterhouses. Still, echoes of the past remain. Traditional butcher shops continue serving communities across the world. Master butchers still value sharp knives, careful cutting, respect for quality, honest weights, customer trust. These principles would have sounded familiar to a craftsman living 700 years ago. The medieval butcher leaves another legacy as well, one of sustainability. Long before the word existed, medieval workers understood the importance of using every possible part of an animal. Meat became food. Fat became candles and soap. Bones became tools. Hides became leather. Horn became cups and combs. Nothing useful was discarded without reason. Their motivation was economic necessity rather than environmental philosophy. Even so, the practice demonstrated remarkable efficiency. Modern discussions about reducing waste often echo ideas that medieval craftsmen followed simply because survival demanded them. The butcher also reminds us of an important historical truth. Civilization depends not only upon extraordinary individuals, but also upon ordinary workers, performing necessary tasks with consistency and skill. Castles required builders. Ships required sailors. Fields required farmers. Markets required merchants. And every town required someone willing to perform difficult work that few others wished to do. The butcher accepted that responsibility. He worked before sunrise. He accepted danger as part of daily life. He endured physical exhaustion, unpleasant conditions, and constant public scrutiny. Yet every evening, families throughout the town placed food upon their tables because someone had quietly completed that demanding labor. Most never learned his story. History rarely preserved his name. Instead, his contribution survives in the communities he helped sustain. When we imagine the Middle Ages, we often think first of knights charging across battlefields, kings wearing jeweled crowns, towering cathedrals reaching toward the sky, or castles standing proudly upon rocky hills. Those images are powerful, but they reveal only part of the truth. Behind every castle banquet stood butchers who had prepared the meat. Behind every monastery meal stood craftsmen who had supplied the kitchen. Behind every army preparing for campaign stood workers, ensuring that soldiers would not march hungry. The butcher did not shape history through speeches or conquests. He shaped it through reliability, through routine, through countless ordinary mornings repeated across generations. His story is ultimately a story about necessity, about labor that society could not avoid, about knowledge earned through experience rather than fame, about families who transformed one of the hardest occupations in medieval Europe into a respected craft. The blood has long since washed away. The slaughterhouses have changed. The guild halls have largely disappeared. But the legacy remains. Every modern food market, every professional butcher, every food safety regulation, every carefully prepared cut of meat carries, in some small way, the inheritance of those medieval craftsmen who stood before dawn with sharpened knives and steady hands. Their names may have been forgotten, their work has not. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy any profession can leave behind. It is remembered not because people speak of it every day, but because the world it helped build continues to feed millions long after the craftsmen themselves have passed into history.